Okay, hello. Welcome to the Online Tennis Podcast, episode number 100. And it is Mr. John Silk that is joining me for this very special centenary episode. John, how are you doing? We're going to talk Wimbledon. Are you excited?
I am, but I didn't realise what pressure and perhaps honour as well. What is it? Pressure is a privilege.
Pressure is a privilege, exactly. Well said, Billie Jean King, of course. It's an apt quote for the number 100, John. Let's dive in. We're going to talk Wimbledon. We, of course, were there. I got to meet John in person while I was down there. He'll be talking a few things that we saw together. We'll talk a little bit about a few of the players that have emerged throughout this week as contenders, maybe for the rest of the season as well. We'll talk a little bit about matches of the week and shots of the week. There's one in particular, I'm sure you'll know, John. A little bit of controversy and a little bit of the quarterfinals preview. Let's preview the Wimbledon quarterfinals. They are set, but we do have, I'll run down them, Djokovic v Rublev, Sinner Safiullin, Alcaraz Rune and Medvedev Eubanks on the men's side, and on the women's side, Swiatek Svitolina, Pegula Vondrousova, Jabeur Rybakina and Sabalenka. So we've talked about a few of the matches. Let's maybe just go through them pretty quickly and get a few of your prediction thoughts. So first one, Djokovic Rublev. The obvious stat, John, that sticks out, and it's not Novak's 1 million matches won at Wimbledon. It's not however many consecutive matches he's won in centre court. It's the other side where Rublev has won 0 of 6 Grand Slam quarterfinals. For me, because honestly, Djokovic could have a bit of an off day, and I still don't think Rublev wins that. What do you think?
I agree. I actually thought you were going to talk about the pair of them. They played 4 times before, Novak winning 3. The only one they lost was in Belgrade on clay, sort of at the beginning of the clay court season last year when Novak is a bit more vulnerable. I said on Talking Tennis today that I thought that this is not great for Andrey Rublev or for those wanting to see a new Grand Slam winner potentially this year. In terms of Novak coming up against Andrey. I also thought that of the 3 surfaces, if Novak has an off day, as we saw perhaps in Belgrade last year on clay, Rublev, I think, there could be something there. Rublev wins the first set and off we go, perhaps. But I think grass is even better for Novak than hard court compared the differential between them. Compared to, we saw how brutal it was in Australia this year.
Mm-hmm. I actually would argue that the grass boosting Andrey's serve a little bit, because his first serve is actually good, gets a bit underrated. I would think maybe grass is a little bit better for Andrey, actually, because he does have the weaponry to hit fast, so he can be sort of front foot, whereas in Australia, every serve comes back, right, and you need to do something a little bit special to make Djokovic defend badly. I do feel like hard court is probably Novak's best against Rublev, just given that the serve's going to get a bit bigger. So he's got more of a chance than he did in Australia. But I still think the best case scenario for me, John, is probably something like the Hurkacz match where Rublev serves well enough to keep Novak at bay, but inevitably in the bigger moments, Novak comes up clutch.
But Rublev's serve is nowhere near Hurkacz's level and his return as well, I think. And one thing I would just say, and this is probably what I'm taking stock in, rather than, perhaps getting a bit more purchase on his serve, is that Rublev has had decent results on hard courts. He was in the ATP finals last year where I think he made the first set very competitive against Novak and probably should have pushed a tiebreak, but an implosion occurred, as it often does. And we've seen him have good results on hard courts, making Grand Slam quarterfinals on that surface. And yet this is the first time he's ever done really anything on grass. Is that fair?
Yeah, well, he was in the 4th round, remember, of Wimbledon 1 year, one set away from a quarter.
But this is the best that he's done.
Yes, it is. It is, you're right. But there's a first time for everything. So, John, a very quick prediction for me would be Novak in 4 sets.
Novak straight sets.
Okay, John. Okay. Let's move on to Sinner Safiullin. This might be a quicker one. Safiullin, a big hitter, of course. He did have the power to do well at Wimbledon for sure, but he has had a fairly decent or safe run. Chapeau, obviously not the hardest seed in the world, given his up and down form. And really, for Sinner, this is a ridiculously good chance to make his first semi-final, and really, unless he has a pretty off day, and this would be telling if he has an off day here. I'm not expecting it to happen. I do think Sinner in 4, but I mean, this is the best chance he's ever going to have at getting a semi-final, John.
Yeah, right. And in fact, we've got 3 quarterfinalists on the men's and the women's side who are all seeking their first semi-final, and 3 people that are sort of top teners, people that have been knocking at the door, because we're obviously going to come to Jessica Pegula shortly, but we just highlighted Andrey Rublev as well, who keep getting to quarterfinals at slams and not being able to get over the hurdle. Well, Rublev's task we've already touched upon, but as you say, Sinner is. I mean, I also think that you get that win that Safiullin had against Bautista Agut in the first round. Probably good for him as well to meet RBA in the first round rather than RBA in the third or fourth round, who's on a run. And also Chapo, I think, had an injury issue in that match.
Yes.
So I'm not sure when we're going to see him again. Otherwise, I think we probably will be seeing Chapo against Sinner. And I think that would have been an interesting match. I probably would have made Sinner slight favourite, but yeah. So I think Safiullin, great run, but I do expect it to come to an end. And I also predict a straight sets win here for Sinner too.
Yep, fair. Did I say 4 or 3? I think I said 4. I'll stick to 4. Moving on to the other 2 men's matches, let's start with Medvedev Eubanks and then get into the juicy last quarterfinal. Medvedev Eubanks first, though. Obviously, Chris Eubanks making an incredible run through 4 rounds, and also, of course, he was in Mallorca, having won the title there. He's now on a 9-match winning streak. This is pretty huge for him. So he's got loads of form. Obviously, the serve is feeling incredibly clutch. Just FYI, Eubanks now on an 8 consecutive tiebreak winning streak dating back to Shelton in Mallorca, challenging Novak, who's on 11. Point is, Eubanks is feeling very, very good in the pressure moments. We saw it against Tsitsipas in that 5th set. Mm-hmm. Big backhands down the line, obviously, coming to mind on one of the break points. Massive serves in that final game. Does Medvedev get bothered by Eubanks? Your thoughts first, John?
Yeah, I think this one is a bit more random than the previous couple of matches that we touched upon. I think Eubanks has proved to be a tricky opponent for Medvedev in the past. And I think, as you say, he's on a good run. In fact, the previous round, I just came to my mind that Tsitsipas and Eubanks would be the previous 2 Mallorca winners, if you like, in the last 2 years, leading into this tournament. And I did think Tsitsipas would have too much for Eubanks, but 2-1 down. And actually, it felt like the gap at 2-1. Sometimes 2-1 is still nip and tuck, or sometimes you get a bit, but that felt like a huge third set. And I thought this is a very, very long way back for Steph.
He hadn't been broken, of course.
Yeah, right. So there we go. But Eubanks, hats off to him. I do think this is where it comes to an end, but probably in 4.
4. Fair. I think the problem for me is, just touching on it very quickly, is when you get somebody like Medvedev who's making more returns than most players, who's putting them back neutral into positions where Eubanks just keeps having to go aggressive over and over again, it can get in the head of the opponent. And Medvedev's movement's not as sharp as it is on a hard court, but I do think 4 sounds about right, definitely. Final one on the men's side, Alcaraz Rune, 3rd meeting. Obviously, this is quite a fresh rivalry, but we already have a pretty good idea that the matchup is pretty decent, given the 2 matches we've already seen, even if Alcaraz ended with a walkover in the Paris Masters.
Holger Rune had the walkover, right?
Yeah, that's what I meant. Sorry, that's what I meant. I meant that Alcaraz retired. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, yeah. No, but that's fair. Point is, they are able to, again, sort of defend each other's massive shots so well that you'll get some very flashy rallies you wouldn't get with other matchups, basically. Even on grass, I feel like the 2 of their serves, there's not a massive amount differentiating the 2. They can hit big serves, but most of them are still, not most of them, but a lot of them are still going to come back and set up sort of extended rallies. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. For me, John, the grass courts will favour Alcaraz's massive forehand a little bit more than Rune's offensive weaponry, which still is getting a little bit questioned. He's more of a defensive player for me. I do think that will make a massive difference in the end, in the sort of more pressure moments, but there's no way it's not close, right? There's no way it's not close.
I think similarly, I think I would be more pumped for this on a hard court. Maybe in New York, for example. I think this could be very exciting if they were to meet in the latter stages there. I'm just wondering if we will get the same dynamics and the same sparks that did fly, I think, at times at the Paris Masters last year. But like you, I'm erring more towards Alcaraz, probably in 4 sets. And maybe some of your viewers and listeners are thinking, well, he's a bit down on these quarterfinals. Well, actually, I kind of am, actually, on what I think has been a really good tournament. The 4th round was so exciting, I thought, on both the men's and the women's side, and we'll come to the women's in a second. But I actually think the quarterfinals, there's a bit of I don't know. I just feel a little bit deflated looking at some of the matches. In that, there's not many that I think are going to be close. But as you say, maybe this is the one that will be the closest. And anyway, I'm going for Alcaraz in 4.
This definitely has the most potential. I'm gonna go for 5, just because I think the serving advantage that Alcaraz has against most players gets a bit diffused against Rune. He will be forced to play a few more balls, obviously, and the forehand sometimes can be a bit ropey under pressure. It's not often, but sometimes it does. For the entirety of a match, if he's not feeling comfortable, and we saw that against Sinner last year. Sinner made him play a lot of balls, and he was forced to hit big off of low balls, and it did kind of mess with him a little bit. So I still expect Alcaraz's power to be too much in the end, but I think Rune will definitely, I was rating his defensive skills so highly earlier in this video. I feel like that's going to make the rallies very, very difficult for Alcaraz to win. So yeah, I'll go 5 for Alcaraz, John. But so far we're agreed on the winners.
Yeah.
Yes. Might differ on the women's side. First one we'll start.
I think we're going to agree, but I could be wrong.
We'll see. I think you're probably right, but we'll see. There's one maybe. The first one, though, I think we'll agree, obviously. Swiatek v Svitolina. The problem for me, John, is that Svitolina is not a power player. If you're not a power player against Swiatek, you are toast. Pretty much. Yep. That's as simple as it gets. Quick shout out to Svitolina, by the way, for beating 3 Grand Slam champions, Kenin, Williams, and Azarenka. Pretty cool.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, and to be honest with you, maybe I need to row back or apologise to Elena as well. But after she beat Venus in the first round, I think I said to you last week in Wimbledon that it didn't really look good on either side of the net, and I wasn't really sure about Elena's chances of going deep. But she's proved me wrong by reaching the quarterfinals, and that match obviously against Azarenka being pivotal and memorable for so many reasons. But I do think her run is also going to come to an end for many of the reasons you highlighted. And I think Svitolina has done marvellously to get to the quarterfinals at 2 Grand Slams back to back, having obviously been off the tour for such a long time. So great run, but yes, I see it coming to an end against Iga.
Yeah, very astute of you to point out 2 Grand Slam quarterfinals back to back. Insane, given Svitolina's coming back from giving birth and everything like that. It's just amazing. It's an incredible achievement. Next one, I want you to take first, John. Pegula v Vondrousova. What do you think?
So I think Vondrousova, I wanted to get her run up, and I have got it, because I remember thinking this is tough, okay? For early rounds, in my opinion, to come through Peyton Stearns in straight sets, Kudermetova, who, by the way, I had going to the final, but Kudermetova was in a group of 4 or 5 players that would have been an unusual, if you like, perhaps semi-finalist, along with Vondrousova, along with Donna Vekic, perhaps, who I think you had in the final, and then, of course, coming through Buskova in the round of 16. So I think her run to the quarterfinal, getting through Kudermetova and Vekic in straight sets in particular, arguably it's the two hardest of the person who's had the toughest route to the quarterfinal, perhaps. At least I think Kudermetova and Vekic is very difficult second and third round opponents. So that's the first thing. Vondrousova's got pedigree. She's been past the quarterfinal of a Grand Slam before. I also think Vondrousova on grass is fine. So I think we can get a feeling as to where I'm heading. And I think for Pegula, this would be possibly the most crushing of all her quarterfinal defeats, bearing in mind her status right now as the seeded 4 player. We saw her do very well on quick, speedy courts in Sydney, I think it was at the beginning of the year. But I do think her run to the quarterfinals, as it has been quite a few times this year, she's managed to hold that ranking. I think largely because of some fortunate, shall we say, draws. I've been doing these draw predictions all year, and suddenly Pegula, who I don't predict to go deep, is suddenly in my semi-finals. Well, that lends itself to being a favourable draw. And finally, I think from Vondrousova's perspective, I was looking at the other quarterfinalists, and at certainly 4 or 5 of them, you don't want to be playing Sabalenka, a former semi-finalist here who's having the year of her life and could well be world number 1 in a few days from now. You don't want to be playing Iga Swiatek for obvious reasons. She's been number 1 forever and a day, and despite her, her lack of pedigree on grass is certainly proving many doubters wrong on the surface this year. You don't want to be playing last year's champion Rybakina. You don't want to be playing on Jabeur. You do want to be playing Jessica Pegula. And I'm going to go with Vondrousova in 3 sets.
Yeah. Yep. Obviously touched on the fact she knocked out both of our finalists. And I was so high on Vondrousova in the French Open. I was like, oh, she's going to get to the final for sure. Let's get back on the Vondrousova train. Like, she's an amazing player. I just kind of doubted her a little bit on grass. Didn't really know how well it worked. I kind of thought there's a lot of stuff there that points to a clay court kind of champion, basically. But she's difficult to play on any surface. She's obviously proving that. Jess Pegula does have a better game for me on grass on paper. But I think a lot of the fact that she's not got through the quarters before, and there might start, particularly against Vondrousova, who's going to make you play balls, basically, with that lefty forehand. I think the fact she's going to have to come up with something special might work against her. And I'm also going to go the same as you, John. Vondrousova in 3 sets, I think. Next one. Jabeur v Rybakina. That could be, or Rybakina even, could be the match of the quarterfinals in a way, because it's a rematch of last year's final, right? Just quickly previewing or reviewing how they got there. Rybakina's not really been challenged after dropping her serve in the first game she played of the tournament. She hasn't gone on to get broken again. She got a walkover, pretty easy one against Bolter. Yeah, not much going on there in terms of how she's got to the quarters. And then for Jabeur, good win against Andreescu, not the most accomplished grass quarter. Kvitova didn't really show up to the races. She was pretty up and down. But if you looked at Jabeur in a bubble and didn't pay attention to what was going on the other side of the net, Jabeur's been playing very, very good tennis. She has been playing very well, and she is the sort of master disruptor. She did a very good job of that against Kvitova, despite the fact the Czech didn't play particularly well. I'm going to go the same score as last year, though. I think Jabeur will do a good job of staving off Rybakina for a little while, but inevitably Rybakina's ability to hold serve over and over again. Rybakina in 3. It's too much of a power disparity, John. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, as you said, looking on paper, that win in particular over Kvitova, 6-love, 6-3 is very impressive. Yeah, Kvitova just seemed a bit off it today. Didn't seem to be moving as fluidly. Maybe, I don't know, too many matches, not sure. I mean, she obviously won in Berlin earlier in the grass court season. But yeah, very impressive. First of all, a bit like Svitolina, but for very different reasons. Back-to-back now quarterfinals in the last 2 Grand Slams. Both to some extent, I think particularly in Paris, a little bit surprising, bearing in mind her patchy form this year, which has largely been down to injuries. I think there have been some flashes, such as I think it was in Stuttgart where she started to look really good. Unfortunately, she then got injured and maybe rushed back a bit for Paris. On the other side of the net, though, more significantly, I almost like it that Rybakina got tested like she did in that first round and came through it. We've seen it so often with these champions where they drop a set, they even get pushed early in a tournament, and then they start purring. And I know she was a bit perhaps fortunate today, Rybakina, in that she had a walkover with Haddad Maia. But I actually think going into this match, not only is Rybakina the favourite, I probably will go for straight sets. I just think that the gap between the 2 players right now is probably larger than it was on that Saturday afternoon a year ago. So I'm going to go with Rybakina in straight sets.
That's fair. I'm just thinking slow start. Basically, that's exactly the same as last year in a way, which is why I'll give 3. But John, I totally understand straight sets there. Keys v Sabalenka for the final quarterfinal. Madison Keys, of course, won in Eastbourne. She has now won another 4 matches. Similarly to Eubanks in the men's, she's also won 9 matches on the bounce. She is in perfect form, and when Keys is in perfect form, it's very tough to underrate her because she hits a very flat, powerful ball. A lot of people have said the biggest forehand in the game. She knocked out Mirra Andreeva, who, of course, I've been talking about throughout the show as one of the best defensive players we've ever seen. Came back from 6-3, 4-1, 30-40 down as well. So a very, very good comeback. However, all of that said, Sabalenka maybe could have been challenged by somebody with something else. But for a bellow power player to hit her off the court at the moment. It just doesn't feel that likely to me. You look at Alexandrova in the previous round, I thought, well, maybe Alexandrova hits Sabalenka. 6-4, 6-love. The only other person who is challenging her at the moment in terms of that style of play is Rybakina. And we saw it in the Australian Open final. Sabalenka has the game now, the substantial changes to win those sort of matchups. And I feel like even if Keys comes out playing pretty well, I think Sabalenka is going to win that match in straights. I don't know how you feel, John. She's my pick for the title, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's how I feel.
Yeah, Keys could be a bit random, and Sabalenka we know can have an off couple of games. But yeah, like you, I think actually it should be, unless something random happens. I do think that Sabalenka will also win in straight sets. And like I say, I'm sorry to the audience to be all doom and gloom. I think I've gone for 1 3-setter in the women's and no 5-setters in the men's. But it's just that we had so many Iga probably had her toughest match. I think she'll have possibly all the way to the final in the 4th round against Bencic. The gap between Svitolina and Azarenka is minute, as we saw, in that match of the day, in that incredible match. Andreeva as well against Keys today was also an exciting one where could have gone either way, youth versus experience and all the rest of it. And so many of these other matches that we've had have been close, particularly on the women's side in the 4th round. But I just look at the matches in the quarterfinal, unlike Jakub, who I saw mentioning earlier today, and he's so pumped for these women's quarterfinals. I don't know, I'm just looking at them with not the same level of anticipation as I was for the 4th round.
They could all go completely differently, though, of course, John. So we will see. But
I have been known to get predictions wrong.
I've not heard that before, John. Sabalenka in 2 or 3?
2 in straight sets, yeah.
2. So you're agreeing there. Fair. We'll see. Hello. Basically, me and John also recorded a review of the first week of Wimbledon, along with this Wimbledon quarterfinal preview. So the second half of the episode is going to be reviewing the first week. Enjoy. Let's start with the trip to Wimbledon, John. So I was there from Monday till Friday. You were there for around the same amount of time, right? I want to talk about our appearance in Liam Broady's box on centre court. How great was that?
Yeah, it was amazing. And I'm just really pleased that the match was befitting, if you like, of the occasion of us gracing our presence on centre court. 5 sets, Liam probably getting the most memorable result of his career. I know he had a 5-set win a year ago over Diego Schwartzman. Similar kind of stature of opponent in a way, not just in terms of physicality, but also in terms of like within the game. But most significantly, centre court. And just regarding the match itself, okay, we know now, of course, Liam went out in the next round to Shapovalov. But, just how good a tennis player, not just Liam is, but probably everybody on the tour is just insane. I mean, you and I play a little bit of tennis and, maybe we can pull out a worldie from time to time, but these guys are just hitting it so cleanly, so crisply. I know you were making comments about his forehand, but Liam's backhand sort of on the rise, almost half volleying backhands cross court. Just so cool to be up close. And like I said, to sort of be there and be a part of it, if you like, a very, very tiny part of it, but to be there and see Liam, give his on-court interview afterwards and just how much it meant to him. And, he said about the night before, thinking about what he would say if he won, and just so pleased that he did go over the line. Nothing against Casper, but, having got to know David a bit, his coach, in the last sort of 7 or 8 months or so. What about you? What were your sort of feelings on it?
Yeah, just to elaborate there, of course, that's how we managed to get the tickets. Thank you very much to Dave Samo. It's an absolute honour to be there with him for that. Probably the biggest win of Brody's career. I think the most significant thing for me, John, is how close he was at the time. We thought he could now get to the top 100. One more win, and he's in the top 100. And obviously didn't quite make it, but he's on the verge. And I mean, Broady he's been fighting for top 100 his whole career. This is the guy. This is the guy everybody should be rooting for to make this sort of breakthrough. And for me, when that happened on centre court against Ruud, it wasn't just because of the top 100 significance, but it just felt so deserved. This guy works so hard day in, day out. A few of the other things as well. John, stop me if you've got a few things to add yourself. But I mean, we were delayed for ages, right? The Tuesday totally rained off. We'd been in the queue and we didn't get to see any live tennis. Got to the Wednesday, there were still delays with the rain. And when we finally got to see a live match, whatever we would have seen would have been good, right? But we got to see, me and my friend Colin got to see Jiri Lehecka live. Now, when I came back from Indian Wells, I was pretty high on Davidovich Fokina. Lehecka is now just blowing me away with the level of tennis he can play. I did not really realise how good a returner he is. He's so adept at changing up his return style. Just such a clean hitter of the ball. And by the way, he's only been broken once this week. And obviously, if we bounce around, that might change. But for the first 3 matches at least, he's only been broken once. So he holds serve clinically, and there's almost that Novak sense that this guy is going to break you at some point. So you better break him first. So he is going to be an absolute machine going forward. I know I've been kind of flaky about Lehecka, but you can see the finished product. If he can put it all together and do that week in, week out, top 10. Undoubtedly top 10.
Ooh, top 10.
Yeah, but he needs to put it all together. So from what we've seen so far, there's weeks where he goes down and he goes back up, and he needs to do it a bit more consistently. Last one, just about the trip. We spent the whole of Wednesday evening watching Mirra Andreeva's match versus Ziyu Wong. Andreeva is 100% a phenom. You know, like there's no way this woman is a fluke. She is one of the best defensive players I've ever seen in my life. So Coco Gauff was quite a good defender because of her movement, because of her ability to kind of use her power on the move. Andreeva's a good defender because she's so good at those like open face racket shots, those sort of chip shots. She'll do anything to get the ball back into play, regardless of the technique. She's just a very good improviser, basically. So it's absolutely fascinating to see her live, and she's got plenty of power to back it up. So her serve's amazing. Enough power from the back of the court that she's not getting bullied. She's a very interesting player, and it'll be fascinating to see how her game kind of develops into something unique going forward, because there's already a lot of hallmarks that I would look at and go, that's Andreeva.
I mean, she's already backing up what was an incredible Madrid. The 3 wins she had over there over top players. I remember Leila Fernandez being the first round there, for example, and then she backed up with a couple more wins before just coming up a little bit short in a way against Sabalenka there. But then you sort of see these breakout runs, maybe at Slam, maybe elsewhere, and then they kind of disappear for a year or so, especially at this age with the consistency. But then in Paris, although I know she didn't go deep, it was still fairly deep for her because, of course, she had to come through qualifying, as she did again at Wimbledon. And we're kind of keeping an eye on her during qualifying. We're going, okay, I think it was Osorio she beat in the last round in Paris, for example. And I think she had a 3-set match in her last qualifying round at Wimbledon. And I also, by the way, in terms of the defence, a couple of things I also want to add is I saw Gil Gross just tweet a wall yesterday and just the word Mirra Andreeva above it. The other thing as well about the defence, and this is probably a question for you because I didn't see her play last week and you did, something that really is so important with the defence, and it is so impressive, and I think of Novak in particular, Djokovic with this, is when they're defending, not only are they getting a racket on balls they should never have any right to get a racket onto, but then there's suddenly the depth on it. You know, it's landing on the baseline or near. Is that the case with her defence as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So those sort of chip shots are only effective if you keep them in a neutral position in the court. Like if you drop those short, you've lost the point against the best players in the world. So yeah, Andreeva's amazing at doing that. Another, if there was so Djokovic is a good example, but if there was a male counterpart that comes to mind immediately, it is Rune. Holger Rune is like the best in the male tour at doing it. I would say Andreeva maybe will be contending for best on the female tour, but Rune is incredible as well. It's exactly the same sort of thing. I'm going to move away from the Wimbledon appearance from myself and move on to some of the bigger matches that happened throughout the week. I think the first one, for me, the most important one, if you really rate Iga Swiatek's chances, which I'm starting to, is that match against Belinda Bencic in the 4th round. Saved a couple of match points at 15-40, 6-5. It was a fantastic match. The level from Iga was amazing. One of the few times this year where we've seen Iga really kind of grit it out. And I think for many Iga fans, the first time in a long time really that we've seen her kind of grit out a win like this. Normally she either goes down fairly meekly or she obviously completely dominates the opponent. First match in Iga's career where she's played 2 tiebreaks.
Okay, yes, I think I saw that.
Belinda Bencic, I had mentioned this before, a fantastic returner, takes the ball super early on a grass court against Iga's second serve. That should be a recipe for a nightmare, which meant Iga had to serve really well. And Iga doesn't normally serve really well. Genuinely. I mean, that's not harsh. It's just a fact. She'll know that her serve isn't amazing compared to some of the best players in the world. She served exceptionally well, considering her first serve weakness, I would say, or her first serve deficiency. It's not a weakness, but you know what I mean. She needed them to go in. They did go in. She was a fantastic player from the back of the court. Obviously, so clutch under pressure on those match points. And now with a little bit of confidence, I always mention confidence with Iga. She is the confidence player for me. With a little bit of confidence, she could actually have a fairly good chance here because she's not moving badly. She was moving pretty badly last year. The problem is the second serve. And she managed to cover that against Belinda Bencic.
A couple of things to sort of elaborate on there. I think, as you mentioned, just how good she was when she was facing those 2 match points. So it was definitely more of a case of her winning and saving herself rather than maybe too many critical eyes on Belinda. Although one was a second serve, I believe. And you just wonder if maybe she could have gone for it a bit more. But
my point is Bencic wasn't bad, but she was maybe a little passive in the 2 match points.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, on a match point, and we're playing the scoreboard all the time. Sometimes it's the person who's got the match points against them that decides to go passive, but it's equally tempting to just keep it in the court if you're the one with the match points. I just want to highlight as well a stat from Opta that I saw yesterday. Swiatek could become the 3rd player to win the women's singles title in Wimbledon after having saved a match point en route to the title in the Open era. Venus Williams did so in 2005 against Lindsay Davenport in the final. But I think it's a bit more sort of not spooky, but a bit cooler if you do it a little bit earlier in the tournament. Serena Williams also did it in 2009. So Venus did it in 2005. Serena, her sister, did it in 2009 in the semi-finals against Elina Svitolina. So Iga's got something to possibly aim for there, but there's obviously a long way to go. I think Iga's run has been highlighted a few times by me, at least anyway, to a potential Wimbledon final being a little bit softer than most. But I think this was probably the stickiest one, although I also had my eye on an upset alert against Petra Martic in the previous round. But now she's got through this one, quarters, semis, no matter what surface, she's probably the favourite.
Oh, absolutely. Certainly our opponents as well aren't going to trouble her too much in terms of power. We'll get onto this, actually, John. We'll get onto this. I can kind of elaborate on that later on. For now, maybe talk about Domi Tsitsipas very quickly. Feelings on that? Is Domi back, or is this just a flash in the pan? You'll sort of spike against the best players in the world, right? What do you think?
There's 2 very, very close and very, very painful defeats to Stefanos Tsitsipas. The problem actually for me in evaluating Dominic Thiem and those 2 performances and those 2 results, I should say actually, is I just don't know where I am with Stefanos Tsitsipas right now. So when you're looking at that barometer, if that was Stefanos Tsitsipas of 2021, and I'm talking particularly about the result in Madrid on clay, a surface that both are particularly comfortable on, you'd go, wow, Dominic Thiem is possibly back, even if it was a first round. Right now, I just don't know what Stefanos Tsitsipas we're going to get, because sometimes you think, like in Australia with Tsitsipas's run to the final there, I think he's playing well. I think Tsitsipas in the semi-final, he was pretty good in Australia, but against Sinner, but the point is this: I just don't know what Tsitsipas we're getting, because then suddenly we go, okay, I think Tsitsipas is playing quite well. And then he runs into Novak as he did there, or he runs into somebody else elsewhere, and you go, oh, okay, maybe that dominant. Sometimes we look back on results and we go, well, that result aged well, like Leylah Fernandez, when I said about her losing to Andreeva, I was like, oh dear, that's a really bad. But actually that defeat sort of aged quite well in the weeks and months that followed. I think Thiem being back, we mean top 10, right? And it's still a long way from that. And the longer it goes, the earlier he's going out in these tournaments, even if he is getting rough draws, the more the concern will grow regarding Dominic.
I think he is playing pretty well from what I saw against him and Andy. So the team can still play that level. We just have no idea if he can put it together week by week. I think, John, that is the big question at the moment. It's unanswered. So he is not back yet. We need to see this performance a bit more consistently, I think. Let's talk a little bit quickly about Rublev and Bublik, because that is probably the match of the tournament. Certainly the shot of the tournament. There is a moment, for those who haven't seen it, go watch it on the Wimbledon website or Wimbledon Twitter page. Rublev is up 5-4. He's serving for the match. It's 30-15. Bublik does one of those extended grunts, hitting a backhand where he's like, I've 100% won the point here. It's like, extended grunt into the winner. And Rublev, literally, I don't know how he does it, dives, manages to get a racket on the ball. This ball that is just like ages away from him, and he gets it back into play and wins the point. Because Bublik's just standing there like, well, I've won the point. And he just watches the ball go past him. There was that moment afterwards where Bublik's just looking like literally speechless, like he has no idea what's just happened, like he's seen a ghost. It was fantastic. It was a really good moment, John. It might be my favourite moment of the tournament.
One thing I like about the reaction actually is actually not from either of the two players, although I know a lot's been, a lot of stock is taken from Bublik's reaction in particular. But actually, if you watch the crowd, because it's one of those ones where the camera's behind the crowd looking down the court, if you like, or looking in the direction of Rublev, so to speak, and you see one guy stand up and celebrate basically an unbelievable shot, I guess, from Bublik down the line. And then everyone else kind of reacts to what then follows, because Bublik doesn't win the point. The guy sits down, and then the other sort of 98 people stand up around him. And I don't necessarily think that people were necessarily favouring one player or the other. They were just reacting to what was just an incredible point. But clearly that was a big Bublik fan who thought that they'd won the point. And then they sit down and the other guys stand up, which I thought was really funny from that.
Right, a couple of things. One thing I wanted to mention was Victoria Azarenka getting booed after her loss to Elina Svitolina. Of course, they were at the net. Elina Svitolina has gone on record saying she's not going to shake hands with any of the Belarusian players after their matches. Azarenka knew that, so it was a sort of respectful hand up at the net just to say well done. And the Wimbledon crowd, not knowing this, booed Azarenka off the court. Is that on the crowd, John?
I think it is on the crowd, really. I think it's an odd reaction from the crowd. I saw a very similar thing in Paris, by the way. I think it was with Sabalenka on one occasion where she was booed as well after winning a match against a Ukrainian. And it was a bit weird. But then, luckily for Irina, then certain members of the crowd did start cheering her, especially sort of in between or just shortly before her on-court speech, which I was pleased about. I don't really know. And of course, I understand the temptation in the press conference, but I think some of the players are getting tired of being asked about the handshake thing. I mean, as Azarenka highlighted, what can she do? She not going to be waiting there all day for the handshake. I think some players have maybe not necessarily always covered themselves in glory, perhaps during press conferences over the last few months, but it is an unenviable position too. And I actually think Azarenka's response in the press conference was pretty clear and pretty on the button, with just like, well, what can I do? I mean, I don't know why you keep asking these questions about handshakes, and perhaps the British media, perhaps more than others, I think do sort of dwell on narratives, and especially with the tabloid media being a bit of a bigger presence at Wimbledon than pretty much any other tournament around the year. Yeah. The British tabloid presence, that is. I think they do love, I've often heard stories about the British media in football compared to, say, Italian media. Italian media will go into a press conference and ask questions about tactics, and the British media will go in there and ask questions about handshakes and other things, and dress sense, and some of these other sort of stories that we build up, between two players or two coaches. And by the way, handshakes can be a controversial thing in football too. So it's this kind of tabloid soap opera narrative that I think the British media are a little bit more obsessed with than other media.
Yeah, I think you probably you got the nail on the head, I would say, because Probably in terms of the actual match, yeah, it's a shame it happened. There's not
Well,
much you
yeah,
can
that's
do.
the other thing.
But
Sorry, sorry, Jeff. I mean, that's the other thing. Why don't you want to talk about what an amazing tennis match
I
it
know.
was? That's what
Yeah, I
Vika
know.
said in her press conference too.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Svitolina said it was one of the happiest moments of her life.
Which
Yeah,
is great too, and we should be dwelling on that as well. You know.
oh, exactly. I think it's a shame it happened, but yeah, the fact that the tennis crowd don't know that, they don't. Matthew Willis put it quite well on Twitter. Let's just start thinking about how we get the British tennis fans to watch Wimbledon to watch tennis, sorry, for the other 50 weeks of the year. Because I mean, they're here for 2 weeks. No wonder they don't know about the sort of agreement between the two players. It's a shame. And yes, it was an absolutely fantastic match. It was really, really good. Svitolina getting to a quarterfinal again. Absolutely love it. Back-to-back quarterfinals. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Last thing very quickly. Alejandro Davidovich Fokina's underarm serve at 8-0.
Was it a good idea?
Yeah.
Well, clearly it wasn't.
But, well,
the thing is, Holger, by the way, great comment from him is, and I think you can see it, is he does read it. He sees it a little earlier than maybe other players would, which is great for someone so young that this is kind of a sort of a trait we would associate with experienced players. But he saw it. But yeah, 8-all. I mean, it's always clever after the event and all the rest of it. But I'm just trying to think. It was a first serve. Holger's not someone who tends to be that deep, and he's not a slouch either.
He's certainly not a slouch. Hindsight's 2020, John. This is the thing, because I've seen it.
I agree with that. But I mean, he dealt with it, as in like Rune dealt with it so well that it is hindsight. But you've got to have courage, which I do admire in sport, and I think fortune does tend to favour the brave. But yeah, hindsight is everything, and it didn't work.
He did it on match point against Casper Ruud a few years ago at the French Open, and he won that match. It was definitely an important moment, and it did work. So I've seen it work in the past. Tactically, I'm kind of for it. The overarching point should be, though, let's not slight players for 0.1% of the match, right? When this guy's played 5 sets, 10-8, 5th set tiebreak, he put his heart and soul into every single point. Okay, it might look like a silly move at the end of the day, but Davidovich Fokina, I'm still a massive fan of him after Indian Wells. Yeah. The guy's a phenomenal tennis player. We shouldn't start to sort of sum up players down to 1 point, which is, I think, the whole point I'm trying to make.
Paraphrasing a tweet or two, Jack. Tweet says, silly decision, deserve to lose, or something like that. But there was a half a dozen or probably plenty more than that tweets along those lines, and both are just completely wrong. Because, as you say, it can be effective. He obviously thought it was a good idea at the time. It didn't work, but hindsight and all that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good way to put it, John. I think we can wrap up the Wimbledon quarterfinal preview there, John.
Great.
Thanks very much for coming on. Great to see you at Wimbledon. Hope
yes.
to see you at another tournament soon.
Very soon, yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. Thanks for coming on. Everybody listening, YouTube, like and subscribe, please. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back for the Wimbledon final, possibly earlier. Until then, catch you next time on the Online Tennis Podcast. Cheers, John. Thanks.
Cheers.